So today we're going to start the material body, and I'm going to start off by making some introductions to a program. I want to introduce an app that we're going to use in Network Healers. I have talked about it before, and I might have even have shown you already a little bit, but we're going to introduce it properly today. It's a particular app which we can use as part of the healing program. Not only can we use it to look inside the material body, we can also use it as Network Healers in the Network Healers Hub, because it's good when we are sending energy healing to people. It's good to know what you're sending it to in fine detail, and it's good to see it and be able to visualize it. So this app is going to be very useful as part of the Network Healers Hubs. It's called Complete Anatomy, and as somebody pointed out last time, hopefully one day they will change that name, because it's Incomplete Anatomy, because it doesn't include all the energy anatomy. This is a mainstream app, and it's just the material body. So I'm going to introduce that today. And we're going to use that to go through some various systems of the material body. And I also want to introduce to you a concept that we're using in Network Healers. And it's a form. It's called an information sheet. And we are very slowly working through lots of different medical conditions and writing out some information on those medical conditions. Well, it's mostly Sally and Valerie who's doing the work, and we're compiling these little information sheets just specifically to use in Network Healers, so that we don't have to remember all the information. So whenever we get a person or a healing partner with a particular condition, we can go straight to the database, open up the information sheet. We've got all the information we require, and it will also have information on the energy healing required for that particular condition. And we're going to talk more about that in the lesson called Book of Codes. But I want to introduce this form to you, and just to show you that we are gathering information on each medical condition, because all the stuff we're going to go through today and in the next lesson on the material body, we can't expect people to remember it all. We can't expect people to know all this stuff. It's not about remembering all this stuff and memorizing and knowing the anatomy to a fine level. It's about knowing where to find the information. So as we go through this, remember that I'm going to show you lots of stuff today. And we're going to, and it's fascinating stuff. But always remember, don't worry about trying to remember it all. You don't need to remember it all. You need to just know how to use the app. When you're in a healing hub, you just need to know how to use the app and go and find the information in the information sheets or online. There's information about the material body everywhere. So it's not about remembering stuff. It's about knowing how to use the tools at your available to you. So through this lesson, I'm going to introduce this anatomy app to you and show you how it works. And we're going to go through some of the systems of the material body. And then next week, we'll go through the remaining systems. And at some points, I'm going to dive into the information sheets form just to show you what we're trying to create in Network Healers. So let me share with you, first of all, the Complete Anatomy. Hopefully you can see that skeleton. Right then, so it's this square window here, and you've got these different systems at the bottom of the screen that you can see. Can you see my... Oh, you can't. Can you see a circle around the cursor? Can you see my cursor? Well, that's a shame. I've got this little cursor pointer which illuminates around the cursor so you can see it. Oh, you can see it now? No. Okay, never mind. We'll have to do without it. I've got this little cursor thing that shows the cursor, but it's not showing up on the share screen, unfortunately. Okay, we'll have to manage. So you've got these, if I go down to the bottom left-hand corner, you've got models. And there's lots of different models. You can choose female body, you can choose male anatomy, and then you can choose detailed. And this is where there's lots of detailed models. These are all 3D models of things. So we'll dive into this a little bit today, every now and then, to look at something in more detail. But let's start with the full body. And down along the bottom here, you can choose the different systems. And here it's on skeletal. Can you read that writing down there or not really? Is that too small for you to read? Right down at the bottom. No? Can anyone read it? Yes. Can you see the one that's lit up on the left-hand side here? Yeah, okay. So they're all dark until you turn them on. So if I turned on connective tissue and went plus, 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 then it starts turning on the connective tissue, and you can then take off. And the plus and the minus shows different layers. So for example, if I turn on musculature system here, we start with basic muscles and core muscles, and then it builds up to all of the muscles like that. And then you can take them off layer by layer again. So along the bottom, I'll just read it for you, the different systems that we've got. We've got skeletal system, which is showing now. We've got connective tissue. We've got musculature. We've got arterial and then venous. I'm going to put them together and just call it the circulatory system. Then we've got a lymphatic system, nervous system, respiratory system, digestive system, endocrine system, urogenital system, and this is the skin on the end, which we don't need to worry too much about for now. So the ones I want to go through in these two lessons, and bearing in mind we only have a limited amount of time, so there's so much detail on these diagrams that you can go in. If you go too much detail, then you just run out of time, basically, and we can only fit in 2 lessons in this course. So we have to be careful and try and fit in the most relevant things or the most important things that we think deserve to go into these 2 lessons. So today we want to do skeletal and connective as one. We want to do musculature. We want to do the circulation system and the respiratory system. And we'll see how we're getting on. Hopefully we'll start the nervous system and see how much time we've got for that. And then we'll do the rest next week. Now the thing is, there's a lot of information to take on board. So we don't want to do any more than an hour and a half for sure, because you just get overloaded with information, and in the end you just can't take anything else on board anyway. So we want to definitely stop at an hour and a half, and we'll see how we get on at the end here, whether we start the nervous system or whether we leave it till next week. So the first thing I want to start, before we start the skeletal system, the first thing I want to start by looking at is a cell. Now before I do that though, has anyone got any questions or comments before Okay, let's start at least with a cell before we go on to these big major systems. So let's go into the detailed. I don't know if you guys can read that up there, but you've got female, male, and detailed there. Detailed is the smaller or more detailed version of something. Now let's find a cell, because we talked about the structure of the material body last week, didn't we? And we talked about atoms and how they arrange themselves into molecules, and even bigger complex molecules and huge complex proteins and all sorts of stuff. Well, the next layer up, you could say, is all those atoms and molecules arranged in a cell. And there are lots and lots of different types of cells around the body. And there's the body is made up of trillions of cells, all specialized for a different function. Now, in a generalized type of cell, it's this diagram here called a eukaryotic cell, which is a generalized animal cell. So a cell is like a little ball or a little sphere enclosed in a membrane. And this one's got a bit cut out of it there, you can see, so we can see inside. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because I need to carry on, but as you can see, there are certain important things inside the cell. We have talked about this before in the reincarnation lesson. But you've got a nucleus in the center. That's the nucleus in the center that holds the nuclear DNA, the instructions for the cell and the instructions for the whole body. You've got lots of other organelles inside the cell, which I'm not going to go through, but here, important ones here, is mitochondria. These are the powerhouses of the cell. These are the batteries of the cell. This is what is producing ATP energy. We keep talking about ATP energy, don't we? Because that's what powers the material body. And that reaction, the Krebs cycle, That reaction is happening inside those mitochondria. Now in this app, look, if you highlight something, and I've just highlighted it and it's turned pink, and then you've got a load of information on the side here. You've got the name of it up at the top left-hand corner here, mitochondria, and then you've got a load of information about it here, quick facts. And it gives you the structure, it gives you the function, it's got all the information there. So it's an amazing tool, this complete anatomy. And this is what we want to use eventually in Network Healers clinic, where we're actually looking at what we're trying to send energy healing to. So this is one way of finding information out about what we're looking at in this app. You can also just Google it as well. You know, AI will give you a very complex readout in, well, anything you ask it for, which you do have to be careful about, obviously, because AI does make mistakes. Okay, so that is a eukaryotic cell, and a generalized animal cell, and you get so many different types of cells around the body. I'm going to show you some different types. I'm going to show you a muscle cell or a muscle fiber later on today, which is a specialized cell. Right, so let's go back to the skeleton. So the skeleton keeps everything together. Well, it gives the body a framework, doesn't it? Otherwise, it would be just a big bag of mush. We wouldn't be able to do anything if we didn't have a skeleton. And we have an internal skeleton. It's called an endoskeleton. But many animals or many species have an exoskeleton. And I think we've talked about this before in the material body layer lesson. Things like crabs and lobsters and shrimps and things like that have an exoskeleton, or insects also have an exoskeleton. They have a hard shell on the outside, soft stuff on the inside. Whether we have it, we have the skeleton on the inside. So this is where our bones, our muscles actually attach to, these bones. Now, if you want to go and have a look, by the way, I should have mentioned with this app is that we bought an organizational license to it. So it's possible for everybody to download the app on their computer and use it themselves, and it comes from our license. So at some point, I'd like to try that out with people. So if anyone would like to download it to see if it works, and afterwards give me a shout, and we'll try and make that happen. Because eventually we want everyone in the clinic hub to actually have this copy on their own computer so that they can look at it themselves. And while we're discussing a case, everyone can have it on their computer and independently use it. So if you want to see what the bones are called, you just click on it. There we go. That's the humerus of the arm. And then you've got in the forearm, you've got the radius and the ulna. I'm not going to go through all these names, of course, because it's pointless, because all we need to know is how to find the information. That bone there is the femur. I don't know if you can actually read that. Can you actually read that in the top left-hand corner, the femur? Or not, just so I know. Just? Okay, well, take my word for it that it's come up with the word femur at the top left-hand corner, and then it's got all this information on the femur. So a few things to note about... a few examples to make, let's say. Things that are common complaints, common things that can happen. If we look at the lower spine, and the spine is comprised of vertebrae. Let me take some of this connective tissue off for a minute. Okay, so the spine is composed of vertebrae, all these different separate vertebrae all linked in together, look. And it's separated into three different parts. You've got the lower section, which is the lumbar section. You've got the mid section, which is called the thoracic section. And then the cervical section, which is the top section, the top of the shoulders and the neck area. And common complaints can be things like a slipped disc, for example. And I like using that example because I've suffered from a slipped disc before. So let's just have a quick look at how that would work. So in between those vertebrae, you've actually got discs. So if I go back up on the connective tissue, there you go. You can see the discs have just appeared there. That's an intervertebral disc right there. And if I just switch on the nervous system quickly, you can see that there are lots of nerves going on. And of course, there's a huge central spinal column running through the spine. You can see it inside there. Look, all those nerves running down there. Hopefully you can see that pink as I highlight those nerves. And you've got these nerves that come out through the vertebrae here. These nerves here. That happens all the way up the spine. And those are nerves that are going out from the central spinal column out to the body to control the body. Now, if a disc ruptures or bulges, what happens is that this disc here will actually bulge out and put pressure on this particular nerve here. And that's what causes the pain. And sometimes it can actually cause pain which is not localized to here, because these nerves are actually running down your arms, running down your legs. So you might actually get pain, a referred pain, which is somewhere else. So if we have somebody with a healing partner with a ruptured disc, we want to get this out and see where the disc is, because they usually, if they've gone to the doctors, they might even be able to give us which disc it is. You know, a rupture in the lumbar number 4 or something like that. Then we can actually get this out, look to see which disc it is, and then we know exactly where our healing energy is going. Another common complaint is osteoarthritis. Now let me get one of these forms out, because we've got an information sheet on osteoarthritis. Just want to show you the sheet basically. So that's our medical information sheet. So if somebody comes along with osteoarthritis and we want to know a bit more about it, we go to the right folder on the database on Google Drive, which is a shared folder structure online, a cloud service. And we look up osteoarthritis, and here it is. So then we can just go through it. Osteoarthritis is a loss of cartilage, which leads to excessive friction. This then leads to drying out of the cartilage and further loss. Eventually, collagen, the protein matrix of bone, starts to break down at the ends of the bones. This leads to thickening and the formation of spurs called osteophytes, which can make the joint look enlarged. Synovial fluid becomes sticky and unable to lubricate. The whole joint then becomes inflamed. Movement is increasingly restricted. And then we've got some of the anatomy and physiology involved, some of the processes involved. I'm not going to go through the whole form, obviously. This is just to show you some causes, any self-healing that we would recommend, conventional treatments, and then an energy healing summary, which again, I'm not going to go through now, but it's some recommendations for a generalized condition, some energy healing recommendations, basically. Because we can send energy to remove the bone spurs, for example, increase the synovial fluid, all this type of stuff. And the more we know about it, the better. Back to complete anatomy, because I want to show you, and I'm sure, Veronica, I can feel you screaming at me. Am I going over the allocated time for the skeleton? That's just about right. Right, so you guys can see the complete anatomy again. So let me take off the nervous system. So the last thing we want to have a quick look at is to show you the detailed drawings. So we go back to the bottom left-hand corner and we click the models. And then we look at these tabs again and go to the detailed section. And here we've got a bone cross-section. That's the cross-section of a bone. And can you believe how complex it actually is inside a bone? We just think of a bone as just a solid bit of a stick or something. Well, actually, there's all sorts going on inside a bone. There's a marrow in the center here. You can see that center bit. That creates red blood cells. That's the source of our blood. And in fact, quite often, if you want to get something into the body, and I'm talking medicine here, conventional medicine, if you want to get something into the bloodstream, one of the best ways of getting it into the bloodstream is actually through the bone marrow. Now, we used to get taught this in our medical training on board ships for emergency, to get things into the bloodstream as an emergency. The intravenous is always the best into a vein, but if you can't do that, and that's quite difficult sometimes to get the needle and find the vein, this is actually the easiest way. Getting stuff into the bloodstream is to inject a needle into the bone, into the center of the bone, and it goes into the bone marrow and delivers whatever you're delivering into the body. So you get these bone guns, basically. It's part of the emergency kit on board a ship, and they're like a massive syringe which you jack with a spring, and then you put it on someone's, usually either the leg or the arm up here, a big bone, and then or sometimes a knee actually, and then you click it, and it bangs a needle into the center of the bone. It's not very nice, but it gets the needle right in there and delivers what you need. And as you can see, there are blood vessels going into the bone as well. These blue vessels are carrying deoxygenated blood into the bone. We're going to talk about that in a minute, don't worry, deoxygenated versus oxygenated. And the red ones are, these one here, are oxygenated. So one is carrying blood with oxygen to the bone, and then one is carrying blood without oxygen away from the bone, because cells need that oxygen as part of the Krebs cycle. I think I must be almost time's up, Veronica. But let me just quickly say here, this bit in here, the endosteum. Now, in our information sheet on osteoporosis, we've got some information on how the bone actually gets formed. And the cells that form the bone are actually in this layer here. And there's a fine balance between osteoblasts and osteoclasts as forming bone tissue and dissolving bone tissue. And that's actually happening in this layer here. And this here, these here, you can see the actual formation of the bone, how it actually is, the structure of it, the anatomy of it. And as you can see, it's layered. Lots and lots of different layers, a bit like plywood. And it's made of protein, ultimately, in lots and lots of layers until it becomes really, really strong and solid. Okay, I think we should leave the skeleton for the moment. Is that about right, Veronica? Okay, well, I'll talk about the tendons quickly. So, ligaments, not the tendons. We're going to talk about tendons in a minute when we talk about muscles. But let's just quickly talk about ligaments. Ligaments are these things here. So this is in connective tissue. If you put up the connective tissue, you get all these different layers. And ligaments connect bones to bones. They join all the bones together in the skeleton, basically. Otherwise, it'd just be a big pile of bones. They've got to be connected together and keep the skeleton together. That's what ligaments do. So quite often you have injuries in ligaments, don't you? And it's very easy to send energy healing to heal ligaments, especially if you've got a problem in your own body. And we've talked about the way we do that in the first energy healing lesson with that exercise where we get that, bring that energy into the solar plexus storage and then move it with the breath to a place in the body. Say if we've got a sprained wrist or even recovering from a broken wrist, you can move that energy to that location, and then you visualize. Then you visualize the healing that's actually taking place. So if you want to intensify the power or the efficiency of the healing, you need to visualize well. You need to know what you're looking at. And this is the best way of doing it, using an app like this and seeing exactly what we want to be looking at. Now, let's just quickly look at the wrist as we're talking about the wrist. Look at all those ligaments in there. That's in the wrist. It's a complex bit of kit, isn't it? If you click on there, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. And another one there. All these ligaments in the wrist, if you've got an injured wrist, all these are healing. Okay, I think we'll have to leave it there for the skeleton. So now we're going to move on to... Yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Yeah, okay, so let me just take away some of the connective tissue. There we go. Look at that. We've got a tail. We are animals. This is yes, thank you, Sally. It's a great thing to mention, because we talk about evolution all the time, don't we? Especially in this course, because we want to prove that reincarnation is part of biological evolution. But biological evolution is the evolution of species from one to the other over huge amounts of time, all with just small variations in DNA accumulating to, over long periods of time, a complete change from species to species. And this shows that we have evolved through the animal species. The human being is an animal, because we have we have the evidence in our own anatomy of being animals in it shows up everywhere. And this is a very good example. This is the tail, where we used to have a tail, and very slowly over evolution the tails got shorter and shorter and shorter, because we've got no need for it anymore over evolution, especially as we stopped climbing trees, we started walking along the ground, we started walking upright. We just didn't need a tail for balance anymore or for anything else. And so it got shorter and shorter and shorter, but it's still there. It's still got a little horrible little looking thing. Anyway, right, let's move on. Well, I shouldn't say that. Lovely looking thing. Right then, let's go to muscles. Now we'll leave the skeleton on for a minute and just start turning on muscles. The muscles attach to the bones, and this is what allows us to move around. Muscle tissue contracts. This is a specialized type of cell. And muscles contract. Obviously, we know that, don't we? Because this is how we move our body around. But it's got to attach to bones, otherwise it's got no purchase on anything. So these are tendons. The muscles attach to bones using tendons. And here's a very important muscle. This one here, it's the diaphragm. And we talk about the diaphragm all the time, don't we? Because it's involved in the breathing process. And quite often people think of the diaphragm, I certainly did before I started looking at models, people think of it as just like a big chunk of muscle that sits under the lungs. Well, actually, it's got it's very quite thin look, and it's got a big space inside it. So it's kind of a strange shape, isn't it? And that's the muscle that contracts when we breathe. When we breathe in, it's actually contracting, but moving the lungs down and out and inflating the lungs as we breathe. So if we carry on adding some more layers of muscle, we start adding core muscles. Core muscles are the muscles underneath the main layers of muscles, which are responsible for core movements. Things like balance. Now look at these muscles that run right through the center of our body. Look at that one there. It's coming from the spine all the way through the pelvis and attaches to the other side of the femur here. This is all about balance, isn't it? Keeping our balance. Let's put another layer on. And now you can see tendons. See these white bits at the end of the muscle? Well, that is the tendon attaching to the bone. The actual join, so here you can see a tendon which is actually attaching to the bone there. In reality, there's no actual line between the tendon and the bone. It actually goes seamlessly from one to another. Bone becomes tendon, which then becomes muscle. Here's some more muscles you may recognize. Intercostal muscles, these little things inside, in between the ribs here. These are the muscles which you can pull or stretch or tear sometimes. And these are the ones where you get that really sharp pain when you breathe. Quite often in your back somewhere. Every time you breathe, it's like, that's the intercostal muscles that you've torn. Yeah, right. We do, as we get older as well, we tend to pull muscles doing the less and less stuff. It doesn't take much to pull a muscle now and then, does it? And being on the toilet actually is a very famous one for pulling muscles. All right, let's carry on. Now we'll start to get into the more famous muscles, like the lats there in the back, triceps, biceps. Quite some of these big famous muscles, quite often it's less known that they're actually made of many muscles together, a group of muscles. Like the trapezius muscle has 3 parts to it. This part going down the back, a mid part, and the top part. The quad muscle, for example, here, look. That's made of many different muscles. There's one there, there. Lots of muscles making up big muscle groups. So these muscles, they contract, don't they? Now there's three types of muscle. There is skeletal muscle, which is what we're looking at here. This is skeletal muscle. It's attached to skeletons. And these are under voluntary control. There's other types of muscle. There is smooth muscle, which is not under voluntary control. It's involuntary. It's part of our autonomous system. And we'll talk about some examples of smooth muscle in a bit. There's also cardiac muscle. And the cardiac muscle is obviously the heart muscle. That's the only place in the body where there's cardiac muscle. They operate all very, very differently. Cardiac muscle is muscle that just constantly contracts. For its whole lifetime, it contracts. That's its job. And we'll talk about cardiac muscle in a minute when we talk about the heart. So these are muscles. They have to contract. How do they contract? Well, they need energy to contract. The muscle fiber is actually built to contract. So let me just quickly show you a close-up of a muscle fiber. How are we doing for time, Veronica? Are we good? I like this new method of ours. Very structured, isn't it? All right, let me show you a muscle fiber to finish with. Skeletal muscle fiber, there we go. That's a muscle cell. Remember we looked at the eukaryotic cell at the beginning? Now this is another example of a cell with a specialized function. And it's all been chopped up, obviously, so that we can see inside it. But it's still a cell, but it's got some really specialized functions inside it. You've still got a nucleus. Look, there's the nucleus right there. That's the nucleus. Still got mitochondria. There's mitochondria there. And then you've got these little fibrous things inside the cell which do the contracting. But they have to contract. They need energy to contract. ATP energy. And we've talked about that a lot, haven't we, in the Krebs cycle. And it's coming from the mitochondria here that's supplying the ATP energy that is needed for that muscle to contract. But that Krebs cycle is dependent on various things, as we know. Oxygen. Fuel, as in food, or glucose, is the biggest fuel. And that's part of mainstream science, of course. But also we know that it's, what is not part of mainstream science is the idea that it also needs subtle energy from the meridian system. And when we start talking about the energy body, we're going to start linking all this in terms of linking the anatomy of the energy body and the material body. So let's look at how the body gets oxygen to start with. So let's start with the circulation system. Has anyone got any questions before I move on to the circulation system? Right, and so on this app, the circulation system is split into arterial and venous. Arterial is our arteries. Let me put that on for you there. So you can see our arteries have just come on. Arteries in red, generally, mostly, because the arteries carry oxygenated blood. So whenever something is red, it's got full of oxygen. There is one exception. You can see a little bit blue in there. There's one exception to that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is the arteries that run all the way around the body. Look, you can see all the way down the body, delivering oxygenated blood to all the muscles and everything else in the body as well. Now let me put the venous system on, system of veins. That comes up in blue, look. And blue means deoxygenated blood. That's carrying blood back from the body, back to the heart and lungs to pick up more oxygen. Because at the end of the day, that's what the blood is delivering in this context here. We've just talked about how the muscles make ATP energy. They need oxygen. So the blood circulation system is delivering that oxygen to the muscles or to the cells of the body. The cells use it up in the Krebs cycle. And then the blood then goes back to pick up more oxygen, and it goes round in a cycle. So let's look a little bit closer at how that works, and let's look inside the heart as well. So I'll turn the skeleton off. Now you can see the full circulatory system. So let's have a look inside the heart to start with, because the heart is the pump, which is pumping all that blood around the body. The blood needs to have a flow, otherwise the oxygen's never going to get to the right place. So it needs to be flowing. So the heart is a pump, which is pumping that blood around the body. It also needs a supply of oxygen, and that's coming from the lungs. We're going to talk about that in a second, though. So let's look inside the heart. So in this app, it's quite good because you can highlight something and then you can hide it and you can see underneath it. So if I click, you probably can't see that there, but there's a word called hide. You click that and you take a layer off. And then you can do it again, take another layer off, hide, and then you get to deeper and deeper. Now, the first thing I want to talk about here is, and if I just take away some of the veins and arteries so we can see a bit better, so that'll almost do. Ooh. Can you see these vessels in there that's on the heart? These vessels there. These are the vessels that are supplying blood to the heart muscle, to the cardiac muscle. Now, that cardiac muscle is doing a massively important job, isn't it? It's pumping blood around the body. And if that stops, the body's going to have a massive problem, isn't it? It's not going to get the oxygen that it needs, and cells will start to die. So this cardiac muscle is super important, and it's got its own blood supply to supply it with oxygen. Now, if there is a blockage in these blood vessels, this is what causes a heart attack, or what is commonly known as a coronary thrombosis, a blockage in these little vessels supplying oxygen to the heart. And in fact, angina as well. You may know a bit about angina. Well, angina is also a buildup of plaque in these arteries, which reduces the flow to the heart, gives people pains in the heart. Now, let's look inside the heart. So what we can do is carry on hiding stuff. Now we're getting to the inner layers, look. So let's look inside. Now you can see inside the heart, look. Isn't that wonderful? So the heart has different chambers in it. And there you can see inside a ventricle. There are two ventricles, one either side. There's one there, and if I take that away there's one there. Two separate chambers there, big. The ventricles are big chambers, big, thick walls, and that's what's doing the pumping, those two chambers there. The heart has also got other chambers here. This is an atrium, and it's got an atrium on both sides. So you can actually, let's have a look inside there. Look. Inside the atrium there, it's a separate compartment inside that one. So you can see some valves in there. Now, I don't know if you can see my pointer there, unfortunately, but so that there is a valve which is opening and closing as the heart pumps. So what we're going to do now is we're going to trace some of the flow of blood around the circulation system, so you can see how it actually goes around the body, goes through the heart, picks up oxygen. So let's start somewhere. Let's start with where blood is coming in. So this vessel here, this big blue vessel here, is called the vena cava. That's the biggest vein in the body. And blood coming back from the cells of the body is coming through the vena cava, and it's coming up here, and it goes in through that valve there. That's deoxygenated blood coming back from the body through that atrium, through that valve, and it comes into this ventricle here. There we go, it's coming through that valve there. And that ventricle is pumping so hard, it gets squidged or squirted out of that valve there. That one there. So deoxygenated blood is coming out of this artery here, and that goes to the lungs. And that's called the pulmonary artery, because it's going to the lungs. So it goes to the lungs, and it picks up oxygen. We're going to talk about the lungs in a minute. But it picks up oxygen, and then it comes back to the heart through this one here, this vein here. Hopefully you're still following me, because the blood comes back in through that atrium there, and it goes through that valve and into this ventricle here. So it goes through that big valve there and into this ventricle here. And then, so this is now oxygenated blood. It's been to the lungs, and now that needs to go around the body. Now, if you look up through the ventricle there, you can see another valve. That one there. It goes through that valve, and it's coming up through this big artery here, which is the aorta. I'm sure everybody's heard of the aorta, very famous artery, the biggest artery in the body. And that aorta then comes down, and that's oxygenated blood going around the body. And that comes down in front of the spine. Let me just turn the skeleton on again. See now that aorta is coming down the front of the spine, and then that delivers blood all around the body with oxygen in it. And the cells use the oxygen, and then they send it back through the veins, the venous system, the blue on this diagram. And they all flood back into the vena cava, the big blue artery there. And then back to the heart. And then around again, through the heart, pump to the lungs, pick up the oxygen, back to the heart, pump it around the body, deliver the oxygen to the cells, and then back to the heart again. What an amazing system. Any questions before I carry on? Well, we can probably have a little break here, I guess. I'm going to do the respiratory system next. Excellent. No, that's good to hear. Yeah, it's an amazing app. And to be honest with you, the lesson wouldn't be half as good without this app. I mean, I remember learning this at school and at university, and it was fascinating, but, just with diagrams. But having an app like this is just unbelievable. I absolutely love it. So, yeah, I share your enthusiasm, especially about this app. It's wonderful, isn't it? And that's what kind of inspired me to draw the energy body, actually, and the other energy frameworks, because this is so useful. So I used another 3D modeling app to actually draw the bioenergy frameworks, which we're going to go on to after these lessons. Hi, Jules, or Diane. I think Diane's first there, actually. What actually drives the heart pump is that cardiac muscle is designed to only ever contract. So it's constantly contracting. It doesn't stop contracting ever. And it needs fine control of that contraction. So it's the nervous system which is actually controlling it through various nerves inside the heart. It's called the sinoatrial nerve, but it's actually controlling the rhythm of the contracting. The cardiac muscle just contracts on its own. You give it a supply of oxygen and food, and it's just going to contract like that. And then the nervous system actually regulates it. And that's why when you have problems with the nervous system, sometimes it can go, the rhythm can go off. That's why people have pacemakers, to actually control that contraction rhythm through external means. Okay, so now you're talking about another type of regulation that comes through, so the sinoatrial nerve that I've just talked about has a further regulatory method, and that comes through the vagus nerve. Now, I'm going to talk about the vagus nerve in a minute when we talk about the nervous system. And it's an autonomous system, so you're not regulating it consciously, although it has been found that certain practices can have an effect on the regulation. So, for example, breath work. There has been some studies showing that breath work and other different types of alternative methods can actually bring down the heart rate and bring down the breathing rate through the vagus nerve. It stimulates the vagus nerve somehow, which is part of what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. It's the part of our nervous system which brings everything down into a state of relaxation. So yes, there are some conscious things that you can do to have an impact on that, like breath work. And Jules, I think you had a question? Yes. Now, do you mean through the heart, or do you mean more in the lungs? Yes. Okay. So deoxygenated blood is coming through this vein here, and that's from the body. The body's used up all the oxygen, and it's going through the vena cava. And the vena cava delivers this blood into this atrium here. And it goes through that valve into the ventricle, into this ventricle here. And then it gets pushed out because it's pumping, it's squeezing. The heart is squeezing that blood. It's pushing it out of that vessel there. And that valve is the valves, by the way, are there to make sure it goes one way. Otherwise, you've got blood going the other way. So that's what the valves are there for. So the deoxygenated blood gets pushed through that vessel there. Now, if we just go and have a look at where that vessel is going, it's going to the lungs, because this artery here is the pulmonary artery. That goes to the lungs. I'm going to talk about the lungs in just a second. But I can add the lungs on quickly so you can see where they are. So the lungs are there. Look, they are wrapping around everything. And I can take some of the lungs away there. And you can see this vessel here is going to the lungs to pick up more oxygen. So oxygen goes into the blood. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to talk about the respiratory system. But then it comes back to the heart. Once it's been to the lungs to pick up oxygen, it comes back to the heart through these guys here, these arteries here, and it goes into the back of the heart there, the atrium. But difficult to show you. I'm just going to try and there goes into that atrium there, and then through this valve into that ventricle there, and then again that ventricle is squeezing or pumping that blood out of a vessel that's going out the top of the heart. Can you see it? There's the valve that you can see in the middle. That's going out of the top of the heart. Now, if I zoom out again and show you the vessel that's coming out of, actually coming out of this one, this big main one here. So that's getting pumped to the body. And that is the aorta. That is oxygenated blood that's getting pumped through the biggest artery in the body out to the rest of the body. And you can see that it goes down. There's this big loop that goes down to the rest of the body, but it also actually goes up. So look, there's some arteries that's going up here as well. Subclavian artery. This one here is quite a famous one, this one in the middle, the carotid artery. So if you trace them up, because I didn't do this before, but if you trace them up, that's going to the head and brain area. So can you see the one I've highlighted there? That's the carotid artery. That's the artery that you press your fingers on when you are taking your pulse. That carotid artery there, you can actually feel that pulsing. And by the way, you will only feel a pulse in arteries, not veins. And the reason why that is because the arteries are under high pressure, and the pumping of the heart creates this wave of pressure going through the arteries like that. So that's why you can feel this really strong pulse in the arteries. The veins don't have a pulse because the pressure is dissipated by then. It's gone through all the cells and the body tissues of the material body. And really the veins are just taking up the slack and bringing it slowly back to the heart. So it's very low pressure in a vein. You know, if you cut a vein, you just get a flow of blood that comes out, you know, of just a flow. You cut an artery and it will start spurting. That's why it's much more dangerous to be severing an artery than it is a vein. And the color is different. You know, when you cut a vein or cut an artery, the color is actually different from oxygenated blood to deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood is very dark red. Oxygenated blood is bright red, and it spurts. Okay, there we go. I guess we should have a little break. Right then, so let's crack on then. So we're going to move from the circulation system to the respiratory system, because the circulatory system is how the body gets oxygen around the body, but it needs to pick up oxygen, doesn't it? So before I do that, I just want to bring your attention back to some subtle energy systems as well. We are talking about the material body, of course, in this lesson, but after these material body lessons, we're going to start talking about the energy body and other biomagnetic energy frameworks. But we should also always remember that it's all part of one system, really. We're separating it out in layers just so that we can understand it. But it's all one system. It all functions together. So, you know, the circulatory system here is taking blood around the body and delivering things to the cells of the body. Well, you've got a very similar system going on in the energy body with the chakras. The chakras are pumps, just like the heart is a pump for blood. Well, the chakras are pumps for energy, for magnetic energy. And they separate out the right frequencies and they pump those frequencies around the body through the meridian system. The meridian system delivers those subtle energies to every single cell of the material body because it's needed as part of the Krebs cycle. Same thing that's going on with food and oxygen. Now, of course, the fact that the meridians are needed for that is not part of mainstream science. I have to keep adding that, but it will be. We're very sure about that. So it's all connected, basically. It's all part of the same anatomy. And that subtle energy that's needed to go to every single cell of the material body is part of the energy body circulation system, the meridian. So the anatomy is very similar, isn't it? It's just in different types of energy. And the chakra system is also linked to the breathing cycle because, if you remember doing this in the bioenergy layer, there is a central control to the chakras which is linked to the diaphragm. So that's why the chakras are linked to the breathing cycle. That's why breath work is so important. That's why breath work is so important for getting those chakras active and clear and free of obstructions. So it's all connected, isn't it? One day, these particular apps that exist in the mainstream will include subtle energy systems. And, you know, the respiratory system, the circulation system and the respiratory system will be connected with the chakra system and the meridian system, all part of one functioning unit, keeping the body alive. So let's look at the respiratory system. So deoxygenated blood is coming out of this artery here. It's called the pulmonary artery because it's going to the lungs. This is the only artery in the body which carries deoxygenated blood. That's why it's blue. Normally arteries are red, veins are blue. But it's reversed. When it comes to the lungs, it's reversed because that artery is leaving the body. Arteries always leave the heart. Veins are always going to the heart. But this is an artery which is leaving the heart with deoxygenated blood because it needs to send it to the lungs. So let's put the lungs on. Now, the respiratory system consists of a few different things. The lungs, the trachea there, the voice box, or the larynx, and then the breathing apparatus here, which does look a little bit strange on its own, doesn't it? Looks a bit like something out of Alien. Now, so let's look inside the lungs, because the lungs, you could say, are like a big sack of air, right? They inflate. The diaphragm comes down, pulls the lungs, expands the lungs out when we breathe in. And air's coming in and fills the lungs. But the lungs are not an empty sack of air. There's all sorts of stuff inside the lungs. There's lots and lots and lots of tiny little air sacs. It's not just one big air sac. So let's look inside. So here you can see pulmonary artery going inside the lungs. That is going to pick up oxygen. Now I'll come back to the respiratory system. I'll come back to this diagram. I want to go to a more detailed version to show you what's going on inside the lungs as the blood is picking up oxygen. There we go. So this is a bronchial tree. So carrying on with tracing the blood, see these two coloured blood vessels here, blue and red. So this blue one here is the pulmonary artery that we've just highlighted before. So blood is coming from the heart and it's got deoxygenated blood. Oxygen's been used up by the body. So it comes into the lungs through these vessels here to pick up more oxygen. And as you can see, these blood vessels here go right into these little sacs of air. And these sacs of air are called alveoli. And here, luckily, we've got a section removed so that we can see inside. So air comes into these sacs. And there's blood vessels on the outside of the sacs. And through diffusion, which I won't go into now, but diffusion is like a word for movement, oxygen goes into the blood vessels and changes it from deoxygenated blood to oxygenated blood. So it puts oxygen into the blood. And actually, also, something else is coming out of the blood at the same time. That's carbon dioxide, which we won't go into now. But That's a waste product of the Krebs cycle, carbon dioxide, CO2. That actually comes out of the blood and goes back out of the airway. So then you've got oxygenated blood leaving the alveoli. That's this red blood vessel there. And then off that goes up here through this vein, which goes back to the heart to then get pumped around the blood through the aorta. So this process here is called gas exchange. It's a gas exchange system. Now a little sideline over to the energy anatomy. You could say that the chakras are also energy exchange systems. Energy is coming into a chakra. It's also getting pumped out of a chakra. It's exchanging energy with the outside. And this is what's happening in here with oxygen and carbon dioxide, gas exchange. Now, when we breathe back out again, see, air comes in and fills these little tiny sacs in the alveoli. When it goes back out again, these are the bigger vessels that it's using. Bronchioles are airways, basically. Now, let's go back to the main diagram. These are the bronchioles. These guys here, these little branches here, or bronchi. Bronchi is the bigger ones. Bronchioles is when it gets smaller and smaller into the lungs. And then that goes up the trachea. So let me just turn off the circulatory system now so we can see what's going on. There we go. This is the main airways, which air is coming in and out. These are the bronchi, 2 bronchi. And this is the trachea, the main airway out to the nose and mouth. Now, I want to draw your attention to something else quickly, and that is another information sheet. So, a common condition of the respiratory system is asthma. And asthma actually is going to be it already is a very important one for us. And it's going to become even more important because it might well end up being the subject of our first research project, which is hopefully starting this year after this course, in fact, hopefully in July. And it may be asthma that we actually do our first studies or pilot studies. So we have got an information sheet on asthma. Again, don't forget, you don't need to memorize any of this. You just need to know where to find the information. You just need to know how to get hold of the information. So in Network Healers, if we have a healing partner that turns up with asthma, and we are going to, hopefully, maybe multiple people with asthma, 10, 20 participants in a research project, something like that. Then what we do is, when a healing partner turns up with asthma, we go to the AIA database on Google Drive and we open up the information sheet, because the information sheet has a generalized approach to a medical condition. Now, we know that people's healing journey is very individualized to that person, but the information sheet is a generalized description of that condition. So let me just share that with you so you can see what I'm talking about. So I don't want to go through it in fine detail, but just to show you our general process, really, and in using these forms in connection with the Complete Anatomy app. So we go to asthma and we get an overview. Asthma is a chronic condition characterized by inflammation and constriction of the airways and overproduction of mucus, causing difficulty in breathing. Asthma can be caused by a variety of different things, such as allergens, pollutants, irritants, or infections. There can be a genetic, hereditary element involved, and there can be various types of asthma with a wide degree of severity. In worst cases, severe asthma attacks can happen, which can be life-threatening. So then we go into some anatomy and physiology involved. So the trachea, which we just looked at in the app, that's involved. The lungs, the whole lungs as a whole. Bronchi, the tubes which air come in and out of. And the bronchioles, the smaller version of them. Alveoli, those little tiny air sacs, they're involved. Now, I won't go through the rest of them. Lots of different types of cells and cilia, little fine hair-like structures. We go through a bit of the processes involved, like airway hypersensitivity. Airway smooth muscle cells become oversensitive to triggers and contract unnecessarily. Airway inflammation, so the immune system gets involved and starts overreacting to allergens and irritants, causing further constriction. Mucus production, loads of mucus starts being overproduced and starts clogging everything up. And cilia damage. So then we go into other aspects, airway remodeling and genetic variations and different effects. Then we look at causes and then types of asthma, lots and lots of these different types of asthma that you can get, conventional treatments, and then we go into an energy healing summary. So this is going to be very important as part of our research project. And don't worry, we're going to go through this in great detail when we go through our case studies at the end of this course. At the end of this course, we're going to prepare for the research project. So we're going to go through these, especially this particular asthma case study. And so we'll go through this in great detail. Okay, anyway, so let me go back to the diagram quickly, because I want to apply some of the stuff I've just read out. I just want to apply it back to the diagram. So this is the trachea, which is involved in asthma, and it constricts irregularly. And this is the muscle that is used to constrict it. Now, this is going back to different types of muscle, because this is smooth muscle. So if you remember, skeletal muscle is the one that's under voluntary control. That's attached to our bones. Smooth muscle is not under voluntary control. That's controlled by our autonomous nervous system. And this particular muscle around the trachea is smooth muscle. And this is what contracts and tightens up that airway. These are little cartilaginous rings around the trachea. But it's the muscle that is contracting. And if we go into the lungs, go back to the detailed version. Bronchial tree. Here's the bronchi here and the smooth muscle there. Inside those air sacs get clogged up with mucus because there's certain cells called goblet cells which produce mucus, and they overproduce it because it's part of the immune reaction, overproducing mucus. And that just clogs everything up and reduces the amount of space that there is for gas exchange. So there's too much mucus in here, it just clogs the place up. So less oxygen can get into the blood as a result. And then it talked about cilia, didn't it? Cilia are little hair-like structures that line the insides of these airways. And they're designed to catch impurities, catch just general crap that we breathe in, basically. Irritants and allergens and things like that get stuck in cilia. But those cilia get damaged over time by the immune system. And so there's not much cilia left. And that causes issues as well, because it allows anything into the lungs, which then multiplies the effect on the immune system. So in healing, in Network Healers, what we do is we understand the problem in great detail. We decide what to send energy healing to what we want to change in the body. And we use this app, or we will use this app. We've used it a little bit, but we're planning on bringing it in a lot more. We use this app to visualize or to understand what's going on, and that increases the efficiency of the healing. Okay, I think that probably is a good place to stop, because if we started the nervous system now, everyone's probably a little bit frazzled, and the nervous system is a complicated one to go through, all the parts of the brain. So it's probably best to leave that one to next week now. Okay, any questions, comments, or any particular... We have got a little bit of time, obviously, so we can have a discussion. We can, and you know, if there's any random things that people want to look up and have a look at, then we can do that as well. ATP energy is... stands for adenine triose phosphate, and it is a molecule. It is a molecule which carries energy, and the way it carries energy is that it's called adenine triose phosphate because there's 3 phosphate atoms, and it goes down to 2 phosphate atoms on it, or it can go up to 3 phosphate atoms on it. And when it goes up to 3 phosphate atoms on it, it carries a type of energy which some people may call electrical energy. It carries electrons, basically, or some people call it kinetic energy. But it carries energy in a molecule. And this is all part of mainstream science. This is all part of accepted mainstream science. And that ATP molecule is produced in the mitochondria, in the Krebs cycle, and it carries those extra electrons around, and then it goes around goes around the cell and delivers those electrons to various processes that are happening, because the whole body is controlled by chemical processes, chemical reactions in the cell. So that ATP molecule gets involved in a particular chemical reaction, delivers its electrons, and those electrons power that particular reaction or process. Yeah. And it goes back in further as well. I mean, you know, everything you can trace back to bacteria, you know, even further back. The first living life forms on the planet was bacteria, and they were using ATP, but there was no mitochondria there because it was just ATP in the cytoplasm of the cell. The Krebs cycle was happening in the cytoplasm, wasn't it? Well, yes, excellent. And maybe this can come back to the spiritual layer of the pyramid, because who are we? You know, we are our bodies. If we are attached to our material body, we should remember that our material body isn't one unit. It's like a city, a city of lots of different microorganisms, isn't it? And you know, really, if you separate it out, they're all kind of separate little organisms, all working together in one cohesive unit, like a town or a city or a planet, you could even say. So really, who are you? Are you the mitochondria? Are you the muscle cell? Are you the brain cell? Well, that's good that you brought that up, because now you're talking about stem cells. And this is a very important part of network healers. And we talked a bit about stem cells, but not that much yet. But the way we're going to start working in network healers is very heavily involved with stem cells, because, as you just mentioned, some stem cells can turn into any other cell. If you take an embryo, for example, it just starts with stem cells. Those stem cells start multiplying, but then they've got to turn into different body parts. So embryonic stem cells can turn into anything. There's other types of stem cells which can't turn into anything, but they can turn into a particular tissue. So, for example, in muscle tissue, you've got stem cells dotted around the muscle fibers. Those stem cells are just lying, waiting, dormant, and they can be activated to start growing into a new cell. And this is how the body regenerates itself. So if you want to repair a muscle, now obviously the body does this on its own, but if you want to make it go quicker through energy healing, what you need to do is activate those stem cells to start building muscle cells quicker from those stem cells. So most different types of tissue around the body do have their own specific stem cells. And in network healers, with the use of magnetic enzymes, we want to target some of these stem cells. And you can even target certain stem cells that normally can't regenerate. Yeah, absolutely, I would say 100% that it's possible. Another example that we're trying out at the moment is osteoporosis. Now, in osteoporosis, the bone cells start to degenerate and start not replenishing themselves. And that's the balance between the osteoblast and the osteoclast, which I mentioned earlier. Well, yes, you can target the stem cells and actually regenerate those cells by activating the DNA. Yeah, well, that has to do with the programming of the energy, the healing energy. And this works with intention healing or non-intention healing. Now, in our last lesson, we talked about intention healing, programming energy with the intention process of the mind. There's also non-intention healing, which we'll talk about in another lesson. But with each of those methods, either way, the knowledge of the healer impacts massively the efficiency of the energy healing involved. So the more that we can understand in detail, the better the energy healing will be. So that's why we do that. And it's also, it's also, I think, a progression of energy healing towards integration with science and integration with modern healthcare. Because at the moment there is a big divide between healing circles or even spirituality and the healthcare and medical professions. Really, I think we need to bring those two together and bring energy healing and spirituality into the mainstream, but into healthcare, so people have can find relevance in spirituality if it's part of the healthcare systems. And that comes with, yeah, yeah, but that also comes with new knowledge as well. So it has to come with a lot of research, and you know that's not a small job. That's decades and decades of work. But you know it's important that it goes in this direction, isn't it? Because knowledge of the subtle energy systems has to arise for really for the mainstream to be able to integrate it fully. Yes. Absolutely, 100%. So, yeah, we want to work with mainstream conventional medicine. So, when somebody comes to us, you know, we want to know their medical history. We want to know what medications they're taking, what effect that could have on the body. We want to know if they've had any scans, if they've got any diagnosis, because, you know, otherwise we're just starting from scratch. You know, it's really important to use the tools available to us and MRI scans and seeing what the problem is on an MRI scan or an X-ray is really, really helpful. Otherwise, then you're just relying on intuition. And, you know, what's best is to use the tools, all the tools available to us, like researching it online and understanding what science knows about that condition already gets you to a real certain point, a good point already. And then if science doesn't know the rest, then we have to use intuition to go the rest of the way. But it's important to put it all together, basically. Yeah, well, yeah, of course. So basically, I guess here I can just mention another form that we use called structuring the healing journey. Now, this is going to be a lesson that's coming up specifically on how to structure the healing journey for a healing partner. And there we put down everything. We put down the whole journey for them. And that includes the material body, that includes the energy body, that includes all the energy frameworks. It's talking about chakra work. It's talking about the meridian system and blockages. It's talking about karma, you know, removing people's karma, the material body. You know, it's just all part of the healing journey, basically. And everybody is slightly different. And this is where we can really individualize the healing journey. We've got the information sheets where it's general about certain medical conditions. And then we fill out an individualized or customized structuring the healing journey form. That's where we include pretty much everything that we're going to apply to this person. Yeah. Absolutely. There's all sorts going on. And that's why we need regulation. Now, this is very unpopular sometimes when you're talking to spiritual people or healers or whatever. Sometimes it can be a bit unpopular because who wants regulation, all that red tape? But, you know, I think that it really needs it, because that's the problem with the whole spiritual side and healing circles, is that there's no regulation. It's all voluntary regulation. It's not legal. You can do whatever you want, really. It's not legal regulation. And that's what causes a big wild west of all sorts of stuff going on. And in the end, it creates havoc because no one knows what to trust anymore. And then it gets shunned from the mainstream because the mainstream says, well, no, that's all there's good and bad in it, but all the crap stuff colors everybody else. So that's why we need regulation. Right, well, okay, so next week we're going to carry on with the material body and carry on with some of those other systems. We'll start with the nervous system, and we'll go into fairly in depth on the brain, because it's really interesting, I think, to look at inside the brain and see what areas are controlling the body, especially the limbic system, things like that, the emotional response system, and start to actually put together or start to bring together some of the energy anatomy that we've been talking about as well in the lower mind, like the karma organs in the lower mind, the kara and the phala that we talked about earlier, and the guna, the energy programming, start to see where they actually fit in the brain. Because in the lower mind, you're really starting to see the overlay of the lower mind to the material body, because it all fits in perfectly. It's not mismatched. It all fits in the right place. It's all one unit, really. So we'll start to see where these energy anatomy organs are in relation to the brain. And then we'll go on and we'll do the endocrine system and the lymphatic system and the digestive system and the renal system as well. Let's see. All right, lovely. Let's call it a day, shall we? No worries. See you guys. Oh, one more thing. One more thing. Sorry. Assignment. There's not going to be an assignment for this lesson. It will just be one for both lessons on the material body. So I haven't written it yet. So yeah, don't go in and try and do a quiz because it's not there. I'm going to write it this week, and then it'll be ready for next lesson. All right, nice one. I'll have a good week, and I'll see you guys next week.